Next, we have Larry Flowers, and he's the principal of G4 Wind, and he's going to talk about building wind turbines and not walls.
Okay, thanks so much. It's good to be back here. Been coming here for a long time to talk about wind energy. We have a little different panel than is in the program. Dan Fessenmeyer from GE had a personal emergency yesterday and couldn't be here. So Sheldon has had 30 years in wind, I as well, so we'll sort of handle the next 30 minutes talking about a whole variety of issues associated with wind and what the opportunity is. And before I introduce Sheldon, let me just give you some facts. This is sort of the Amory Lovin's overload of quantitative information on wind. So everybody knows what a megawatt is. A megawatt of wind serves about 250 average US homes. When I started Wind Powering America in the year 2000, we had about 2,500 megawatts of wind in the US. Today we have 82,000 megawatts of wind, and by the end of 2017 we'll have 90,000 megawatts of wind. The DOE Wind Vision, which came out a couple of years ago, which has sort of augmented the 20% wind by 2030 report of 2006, said we'll get to maybe 280,000 megawatts of wind by 2030. So we've gone from 2,000 to 82,000 over the last 17 years. Now we've got to go from 82,000 to 270 or so thousand megawatts in the next 13 years in order to get to the 20% of US energy. A couple things associated with that tremendous growth. We now have over 100,000 jobs in wind energy, and probably the solar guys have said to you over this last couple days that there are now more jobs in solar and wind than there is in the entire coal industry. So when we talk about jobs from a national standpoint, renewable energy jobs are much more energy intensive per megawatt hour than fossil fuels. Big environmental benefits in carbon dioxide, SOx and NOx. I would give you those numbers, but there's this enormous 160 million metric tons of carbon dioxide saved last year. And here's one that I don't know that is brought up enough, and that's the public health benefit from not having SOx, NOx, particulates, mercury, and so forth coming from burning fossil fuel. Harvard School of Public Health said we're saving about $7.5 billion a year in public health costs as a result of that. I'm glad the previous speaker talked a little bit about water savings. Sometimes when we have big snow years like this year, we don't think about drought. We see the rivers raging thinking, oh, this is not a big issue. It is a big issue. And wind and solar don't use water for cooling. Water for cooling in the United States is the biggest use of water, bigger than agriculture. And we in the West have a hard time believing that, but that is the statistics coming out of USDA. Wind saved 87 billion gallons of water last year. And here in the arid West, that's really important, both for municipal water supply, but more importantly, for agriculture. Okay, so let me introduce Shell for a moment. Shell is Executive Vice President and Director of Oak Creek Energy Systems. Has been doing wind for about 30 years. From California. California was the birthplace of commercial wind in the world under when Jerry Brown got his first governorship back in 1980. If anybody's been out to Palm Springs or Tehachapi or Altamont Pass, this is where it all began. Then there was a great lull that occurred. Texas jumped in, Iowa jumped in, and now California has had sort of a rebirth of wind energy. And the interesting thing is in California, I mean, if you develop wind in Texas or in the Dakotas or Montana or Wyoming or even eastern Colorado, it is really easy to do that compared to developing wind and transmission in California. And yet there's so many good, hardworking, capable, innovative, creative, committed people in California that they're still getting it done. So California is at fourth right now behind Texas, Iowa, and Oklahoma. We have 14 other states that have over 1,000 megawatts. Colorado is right up there with over 2,000 megawatts. So you're in a state that is one of the leaders. And so I'm gonna ask Shell just to give a 2-3 minute introduction to himself and his company, and he said to me, this will be sort of the history of wind energy. So listen to
I'm
Sheldon.
going to go from the macrocosm to the microcosm and give you a specific example and start with the source. Our site was 1,200 acres, right contiguous to the Pacific Crest Trail, which starts at the north and goes down to the bottom. We had 26 megawatts on the site, and the typical wind energy turbine was 60 kilowatts or 108 kilowatts. The next thing that happened was that we engaged with the state of California and with Southern Cal Edison, which is the big energy provider in that area, on a plan that took a number of years to ultimately create an additional 3,000 megawatt capacity in the transmission lines that were connecting North and Southern California and junctioning right there. And from there, we were in a position to engage in some more sophisticated technology. The first thing that we did was to set up with a contiguous owner of a cement factory, Cal Portland, a 24 megawatt behind the meter project, technologically very sophisticated because it had to interrelate with the varying usages of the plant and also the capacity variations on the grid. The next thing that we did was to double the capacity on our site with updated equipment. And at this point, then, we're going from 108 to, let's say, 1 megawatt equipment. And we then negotiated a, well, this gives you an insight into the complexity of wind energy. Resources on 55 square miles around the site. In other words, much like the same options for oil or mineral rights, the right to set up the turbines in that area. And then ultimately there was a negotiation with SCE for 1,550 megawatt power purchase agreement. And that ultimately was developed in 5 phases so that it's there now, 1,550 megawatts on 55 square miles around the core facility. But that gives you an idea of the trajectory. Now, just to go a little bit to the future for another few seconds, we are now working in Mexico, and because we were taking advantage of an emerging opportunity and market down there, we have 4 sites that have been sold. 2 of them have been completed. The off-takers, the people who buy it, one of them is Walmart. One of the equity owners is Goldman Sachs, and the auctions which were set up there because it was a new system that the Nieto administration set up to accelerate the process of wind energy and renewable energy, was both in solar and in wind. They were very competitive. And here's a most important issue which has been addressed all around this program, and that is that under $40 a megawatt hour was the price that competitive bidding, both in solar and in wind, were awarded. So that gives you the idea of how competitive both solar and wind are in the world. I won't elaborate. We can elaborate a little bit on the economics and why this happens, but that kind of gives you an idea of where it's gone. And then also, I should say that the equipment that is being installed down there and has been installed is now 3 megawatts per unit. So that lets you know that's the trajectory of the growth, the trajectory of the technological sophistication, the scale, and the cost. I'll stop there.
Okay, thanks, Shell. If Dan Fessenmeyer from GE were here, he'd tell you about the technology progression that's been pretty dramatic. If you go to the wind site, which I worked at 20 years out in Boulder, you'll see 100-meter towers and 60-meter blades. These towers are so large now that they can actually get up into wind regimes in the Appalachians that heretofore were not developable. And actually, they're even talking now about going to 120-meter towers like they have in Europe to capture the wind resources of the South in the Southeast. So we're talking about a technology that can serve the entire U.S., let alone the world. And it's interesting that you say you were working in Mexico. I worked with CFE 30 years ago talking about wind energy in villages. It's good to see that Mexico and other developing countries are now moving into wind. So let's talk a little bit about the markets. When this first started out in California, it was Jerry Brown basically making a deal with the utilities to put in a certain amount of wind on a standard offer. And then what happened was, because wind energy back then was not particularly reliable, there was an investment tax credit that brought in a lot of money, but not necessarily reliable turbines. At the same time, over in Europe, they were developing lots of wind turbines, Germany, Denmark, and so forth, and reliability started increasing from, let's say, a 50% availability to now it's over 95% availability, which is a huge number as far as production. So Saul, you mentioned behind the meter, which is a very interesting thing. It went from basically being an independent power producer, taking the financial and technology risk, and then along comes Warren Buffett. Everybody knows Warren Buffett, Berkshire Hathaway. He fought the Iowa RPS for years in court, lost, had to put wind in because to meet the legal requirements. And then after a couple of years, he realized, hey, this stuff works. And by the way, my customers like it. And oh, by the way, I get a return on my investment. So the utilities started making the turn. Anybody who's been in Colorado for a long time remembers Excel 15 years ago was not a big fan of wind. Now they're like the poster child for wind. So it went from basically IPPs to utility ownership, and now there's this new development, and if you could talk a little bit about it, where corporations are now buying wind energy and owning wind energy. Do you have experience in that, Sheldon? Talk a little about that.
I do. Well, first let me say, in terms of the technology, there's also been a very significant development in several areas. The first is that the equipment has become more sophisticated so that it's adapted to specific wind regimes. In other words, if there's low wind regime, the equipment will be developed and installed that addresses and optimizes the capacity derivable from that regime. If it's a high wind regime, the other equipment has variations in that. The other thing is that the longevity of the equipment has extended. We're now dealing with 30-year timeline, lifetime. And the manifestation of that is shown by the fact that the manufacturers are now they originally would go from about a 3 to 5 year warranty. They're now willing to provide warranties and to provide service of the equipment for up to 15 years. So that's been a significant change, and it's been a change that's impacted positively the economics. As far as corporations' ownership, as has been said already, and I won't be redundant on that, the ownership of renewable energy comes in two ways. One, a company like, as I said, Walmart, one of our off-takers, is taking the energy, and others, as I said, a good example of Goldman Sachs, one of our equity owners, is buying the equity stake. The structure of these things, they are very, very capital intensive, and there's a bottom line that has to be there before anybody's going to participate. The bankers have got to be satisfied that they're going to derive from the green bonds whatever the market-based return is on that. The equity owners have to be satisfied that they're going to derive the various tax benefits, plus a much higher yield, a very significant and guaranteed yields, because we're not dealing with, casinos. We're talking about people who are putting big bucks into projects there, and they really want to be satisfied with the return. So those are the elements which have again, institutionalized the investment and the process over the last, say, 15 years or so.
And the interesting thing is, the last 2 years, corporations actually were bigger off-takers, buyers of wind energy than utilities. Now, that's a huge shift in the marketplace. So we see a transition from IPPs, they're still engaged and still involved, in the business, but some of them now are developing, building, selling, and then operating these projects to utilities, and you get utilities starting to own wind energy and getting the return for their shareholder. That motivates them, like Excel. And now we're getting corporations trying to be responsible to both their employees' interests as well as to the environment. So we really have a very dynamic marketplace.
Let me just say that the utilities continue to be purchasers, and they see it in two ways. First of all, these are good assets with good yields, and they also see it as a diversification of their portfolios. Virtually every utility, major multinational utility that we encounter and deal with is convinced that the diversity of their portfolios are the way they're going to function in the future. And they are market driven. There's no free lunch in this industry, but the fact is we are now in a position to provide value so that they can pencil it out, the bean counters, and say, this makes economic sense for us.
So we've talked a little bit about economics, a little bit about markets. I told you about the economic development, the environmental benefits. There's another piece of this, dimension of this, that I think is way under talked about, and that is the economic development benefits to rural America. So when a wind project comes to town, there's a big construction pulse in that community for building these wind turbines. And then when that pulse is over, it's been very beneficial, but only lasts a year or so. Then there's the jobs associated with operation and maintenance. And the thing that I get from talking to a lot of rural communities that they like about this is not only the tax benefits that go to the schools and health clinics and community centers, but they get young people, young families coming back to rural America. If you talk to some of we have an average age in rural America over 65 years old. So this is tough work, being a life of a farmer or rancher, and you don't get paid particularly well for it either. So a lot of the young people move to the cities to get better jobs, higher paying jobs, and so forth. Well, this economic development where you bring young families back to operate and maintain these turbines, because Shell and I aren't going to be climbing 100-meter towers. It's young people who do that, and they become little league coaches. They become the PTA. They have kids, and it revitalizes. John Stolp, who was a commissioner in Prowers County when we developed the big first wind project down in Lamar, talks about this when he was commissioner of agriculture here, about how that wind project, 102 turbines, how that basically revitalized Prowers County and the community by bringing the young people back. And that's something we forget about.
Well, let me add something to that, Larry, and I know that's an area that you've been engaged in very successfully, and that is that farmers. Let's think of Oklahoma, the dirt farmer. All of a sudden, the Beverly Hillbillies, for example, he's got an oil well and he's suddenly got a resource of money that is much more significant and stable than the money from doing the dirt farming and dealing with the drought and the Dust Bowl. And that's true of all of the area on the eastern side of the Rocky Mountains, starting in Canada all the way down to West Texas. These are, a lot of them, large farmers, grain farmers. They have a lot of acreage. And the advantage of this is that the wind resource is there, and that they can have a perpetual steady income, which in many respects is going to be more secure, more steady, and more just more volume than actually the variations that they get from farming. But because of the small footprint of the wind turbine on their sites, there is no negative impact on their farming. They can farm around them and at the same time be satisfied that their kids and their kids are forever, as long as the wind is blowing, going to have an enormously advantageous, affluent resource out of the wind energy that's on their site.
So if you see these turbines as you travel into rural America, each one of those turbines provides that farmer or rancher maybe $2,000 to $5,000 per year per turbine for taking maybe an acre out of production.
Not even an acre.
So it's a big income generation. As a matter of fact, last year payments to landowners for leasing their land was about $250 million to those landowners. Okay, we only have a couple minutes left. I want to leave you with something that I'm spending my time mostly on, and that is educating the young people. There's a lot of people out there in our generation, especially in the East, that don't like to look at wind turbines. Changes the landscape. They think it despoils it, even though it's been proven it doesn't affect land property values. But the young people like wind energy, like renewable energy. They get it. So one of our things that we started when we were at NREL back in 2006 was something called Wind for Schools. And our idea was to take seniors from Colorado State University out to rural schools and do basically a wind assessment, do the economics, talk to the utility, talk to the school administrators, and if they wanted to put a small wind turbine in, help them install that turbine and monitor it. And at the same time, introduce a wind curriculum to that school and wind competitions called KidWind. If you want to see something that's really cool, go to kidwind.org and see these kids developing wind turbines about this size and getting them tested. I just was a judge at the national competition out in Anaheim 2 weeks ago at the Wind Power Conference. 55 teams, one from Colorado, coming to test their wind turbines, and parents come as well. I've had a lot of parents, and what we're trying to do is give kids the idea that there's a different future out there. Wind and solar can be part of their future, whether they want to be technicians or whether they want to be engineers or businessmen or lawyers. There's a job for them out there. There's some 32 different disciplines involved in wind energy job creation. So we have a Wind for Schools program that we're privatizing because the Department of Energy has decided they don't want to fund this anymore. So I spent the last year doing a pilot here in Colorado. And we raised $25,000 from 18 donors. We have a Colorado LLC called Wind for Schools. We're going to move that to 12 different states over the next year, and then to 30 states over the next decade. If you're interested in inspiring kids in wind energy and renewable energy, Wind for Schools, talk to me, and we'll be happy to talk further about that. We think it's exciting. There are right now 100,000 jobs in wind energy. We need 500,000 jobs in the next 2 decades in order to support this growth. With that, I want to thank Shell for coming over to California.
Let me just finish with one comment, bringing you to the future. This year, Denmark, 100% of their energy was generated by renewable resources, wind resources. Not every day, but substantially. This year, we had a similar marker in California, where 100% of all of the energy that was generated on a specific day was from renewable resources. That's the future. And that opportunity exists without any additional increments technologically, just with the cash investments for the United States as well.
Thank you, Shell. Thank you for
Thanks
your
for
time.
listening. And we're available to talk if anybody is interested after.